Hi everyone. Yeah, apologies for this. This is the long-awaited full essay breakdown for our GP environment essay. Unfortunately, I've been so busy with so many personal matters and of course falling sick as well for the past week. So I finally have some time to, talk about this. But yeah, hope you guys find this useful. All right. So we are gonna keep it loosey goosey today, and yeah. Anyway, let's get into it. So this is the question that we are looking at. It's a very simple one because I am not sure what level or at which level of readiness you would be if you are watching this. So I'm doing a very generic question. This is not a difficult one, right? In the context of GP as a whole, but yeah. So when I say a full breakdown, that means I'm going to explain, how I would break down this question and what are the choices that I made here, and of course, how I explain certain parts, but I won't go so in depth, obviously, because the assumption is that you already know some of the things that we are talking about here. But hey, if you have any more clarifications, feel free to drop us a text. My number is on my website, right? And we can always schedule a free trial lesson for you. So, okay, to what extent is mankind's lifestyle environmentally unsustainable? Again, this is a very generic entry level sort of question, but even then, sometimes it is difficult to pass through the sheer amount of information that we have out there, as well as how we can define the scope of our discussion properly and how we can so-called come out with all the points, right? So here's the thing, right? Another big thing here is that there's this phrase "to what extent," and somehow that's a lot of students' kryptonite, because when they see that, they automatically default to, oh, to what extent, that means to a small or large extent. So yeah, we are going to discuss how to get around that as well, right? Because if you use the phrase to a small or to a large extent, it doesn't actually mean anything. So yeah, please don't use that. So typically what I would do with my essay questions is I would obviously break down the key terms first. I don't think we need to discuss that too much. The question is, how do you do it? What I would recommend is you break it down by its dictionary meaning first. So, the thing is that when you break key terms down by their dictionary meaning, it offers you the different ways that you can approach the question. So, if let's say we look at the word lifestyle, for instance, we break it down by its dictionary meaning, it means way of living. But way of living, it can mean a lot of different things, right? And then that's where you can think of it in terms of way of living, habits, consumption rates. So that's one angle that you can take. Then you can also talk about way of living, how things are done from a very generic sort of idea standpoint. Actually, you know what? Just hang on one moment. Let me go and grab my stylus. Okay, yeah, we're back. Yeah, not even sure if I'm actually filming right now. I'm frankly feeling a little bit delirious, but hey, push on, right? So, as I was saying just now, the word lifestyle, it can mean way of living, right? But way of living, from there you can branch it out to, hey, consumption habits, right? Because way of living refers to the word, to habits in general. How do I know to relate it to the word consumption? Because obviously, assuming that you have already identified this, but the adverb environmentally here, then we know that it has something to do with the way that we interact with our surrounding natural environment. right? And then of course you can think of it in terms of the supply chain as well, how things are constructed in such a way that, you know, the way that we live in a certain environment, the way that we consume, and of course finally the way that we manage, right? So when we talk about management, we are talking about things like, you know, do we overexploit certain natural resources? Do we, you know, use up a lot of energy to create a lot of carbon, which would lead to, you know, if unmitigated, it may lead to a runaway greenhouse effect. Oh my god, yeah. So things like that, right? And of course unsustainable, the idea being that, you know, the way that we live, manage and consume is not sustainable in the long term. That means we are looking essentially at long-term deterioration of the environment, right? Now that's the general breakdown, okay? And typically in a fully written essay, right, what I would recommend students do, in fact I wouldn't even say recommend, I would say that this should be a compulsory step. This is a compulsory step for you guys. You should always define the key terms at the beginning of your introduction. We are going to create a video on that soon to talk more about it, but basically the gist of it is that once you do that, it makes it very absolutely clear that you are to the examiners that you are going to argue, right, or make your arguments along a particular line. So over here the questions suggest that mankind's lifestyle, blah blah blah, the way that we consume, live in and manage the environment. There's a missing preposition here, all right. This cannot last because it will bring about irreversible environmental damage. Based on these definitions, then we can start to approach the essay, or rather based on these definitions, then we can start to come up with our different approaches. All right. Now here's the thing, for the topic of environment, the fundamental concept that we need to understand is that environmental issues, right, how must we think of it? We must always think of them as existential threats. So the reason why we want to look at it as such is because for environmental issues, environmental degradation, right, it means that we are making our environment, say that 3 more times, no, I'm kidding, we are making our living environment uninhabitable, because each and every part of the ecosystem plays a very important role, right, and it maintains that sort of delicate balance. So if you have been reading the news, you will see that coral bleaching events are occurring again, right? And I'm filming this on the day after May Day 2024. The context around this point of time, right, the current affairs is that Southeast Asia is facing a massive heat wave. That's why for the past few days it's been so bloody hot in Singapore. Yeah, if these things go on, right, our species will not be able to live if the environment degrades beyond a certain amount, because we need water, right, we need to have good quality air, but all these two natural resources are at threat, right, if environmental degradation occurs. So that's why environmental issues are existential threats. Okay, so once we have done our definitions, okay, then we want to move on to our summary of arguments. All right, so for this particular essay question, these are the arguments that I produced. Number one, mankind's consumption rates are arguably unsustainable, right? And again, I may have mentioned this in a previous video before, but how I teach my students to write your summary of arguments in your introduction is essentially just collate your topic sentences. Keep it simple. And how you write your topic sentences, you use this very simple scaffolding here. Stand plus reason. Alright? It works for both secondary school and JC students. I mean, of course, for JC, you will be expected to use more varied vocabulary, but the idea of doing this is a couple of things. Number one, to make sure that you answer the question directly. Number two, so that your this is to make sure that your examiners know exactly what you are trying to argue for. So mankind's consumption rates are unsustainable because there is an entrenched culture of excessive consumption, right? The idea here is that we are taught by capitalism, right? Not to say that capitalism is a bad thing, but we are taught by things like advertising. We are taught by, or we are conditioned by the way that we consume, to consume excessively, right? Because success equals to bling bling, big houses, many cars, that sort of idea. So that is the reason why I would argue that our consumption rates are currently unsustainable. And at the same time, you know, technically I can combine these 2 points into one big point, but I decided to split them. So I'm looking at it from a consumer's perspective first, then a supplier's perspective. The difference is that consumption, from a consumer's perspective, is a question of quantity when it comes to the amount that we consume. For the supply chain side of things, it's a question of like the practices and of course the amount as well, right? Because these two are inextricably linked. So yeah, I decided to cheese it in that sense, looking at it from a demand and supply points of view, right? But the counter arguments as a result will be quite straightforward, because number one, there has been subject verb agreement. Clearly I didn't proofread this, so please forgive me for that. There has been a rise in nascent ways, you know, of changing mankind's lifestyle singular, and managing environmental resources. So the idea for that, simply put, is that there are ways, the rise of certain things like the circular economy, so on and so forth. And the last point is, you know, fundamental reforms in our lifestyles and our relationship with the surrounding environment. Yeah, sorry about that. Voice still not back at 100%. So yeah, anyway, there have been changes, right? Fundamental reforms, which itself is driven by the existential threat posed by environmental problems. So yes, at the moment, our lifestyle is currently unsustainable. That's how you circumvent all these to what extent questions. You be really specific. So how, or rather the type of specificity that I'm using here is more of a time sort of thing. Currently, our lifestyle is unsustainable. There's no doubt about it, right? Because of the way that we consume, because of the way that our supply chains are set up. But there is hope that things can change. So yeah, that's our thesis statement here. Okay, that's our thesis statement right here. So the first point, right? I'm gonna blitz over these parts, because I mean, if you are watching this on YouTube, you would get, I mean, you can pause it at different points in the video and read the essay, or better yet, join our Telegram channel, because that's where I'll upload this particular PDF anyway. So yeah, anyway, regardless, how I teach my students to write body paragraphs is, instead of just doing a PDF PEEL sort of format, you want to have at least 2 examples, alright? And if possible, an evaluation at the end of the paragraph. Different schools call the evaluation different things, right? They may call it rebuttal, and instead they might define the explanation as evaluation. That's not what it means, but whatever. Okay, just know that evaluation is a form of rebuttal against your main point. Essentially, the idea is that you are trying to either, number one, point out the limitations of your argument, or you are trying to address, you know, certain nuances in that particular thing that you're trying to discuss. So in this particular case, right, how I prove that there is a culture of excess consumption, the best example for that, in my opinion, would be FOMO and fast fashion. So the thing about fast fashion, as you all know, is that it changes every single bloody season, and it compels a lot of sort of purchasing, right? Because every season the design changes, and then afterwards they'll put out ads to try and entice consumers to go and purchase, and you know, it stokes that sort of feeling of FOMO in consumers. But the problem is that, number one, there are a lot of environmental implications there, because it leads to significant carbon emissions. It leads to, you know, the usage of a lot of water because of the dyes, and the carbon emissions also come from the shipping, right? So yeah, in terms of how you can flesh out your examples further, right, there are a few guiding questions that you can use. Number one, it is how did this come about? So we are essentially adapting the 5W1H model here. How and why? Okay, of course the what, that's the details of your examples here, right? And subsequently, what are the implications? So what are the impacts? So for instance, over here, this leads to greater consumption after I talk about fast fashion. As new clothing is churned out every season, this is the how, because we are talking about the methods, right? And the poor quality fabric of such clothing, as well as its low prices, mean that the clothing will not endure, which in turn further contributes to waste, right? Because whenever this clothing gets damaged, then the consumers will dump it, and then they will go and purchase the latest one. How? And then why as well, because we are explaining what causes this. And then the implications is use of natural resources is also compounded by the shipping of large amounts of such products, right? And this contributes to significant carbon emissions and water usage. And I prove it with a stat. So yeah, that is how you would want to explain your examples, okay? And for the second example, there are a couple of ways to approach it, but typically what I would do is, again, you know, we would create, you know, dedicated videos for that, because that's the direction that we are gonna head towards in terms of our content. But I would use my second example as an impact of the first one. Yeah. So what that means is that, okay, I'm using one example to prove this one point, and then how this one point will lead to another point. So in this case, for instance, right, this stat here is an impact of this first example, which is fast fashion. Of course, for fast fashion, you can bring in, you know, certain brands like Zara, H&M, so on and so forth, right? You can name drop those companies, but this particular stat here is an impact of this because of their business operations. That's why they are responsible for 10% of all global carbon emissions, according to the UNEP program. So that's one way to do it, right, example 2 as an impact of example 1, or alternatively you can use a different example to prove the same point. And the second method is very common in H2 history, right, especially when you're writing Southeast Asian history essays. In the context of GP is also quite common in that sense. But it may not necessarily be the best use of the second example, because it depends on what example you're trying to use, right? So what I would recommend is use a totally different example that demonstrates the same or similar impacts. In this case, food waste, right? So it's a very, very simple process in that sense. So food waste, how that reveals, the excessive consumption habits that we have, as well as, the impacts of food waste, things like, number one, obviously, the wastage of natural resources, and number two, the food dumps that create a lot of methane due to, the lack of sufficient oxygen for breaking down all those discarded food waste into simpler matter. So things like that, all right. And at the same time, using large amounts of water, things like that, okay. And that's how you can explain this particular point, all right. So yeah, here I would blitz through this part even more, because obviously you would have access, or at least those that join our Telegram channel, they will have access to all these things. So yeah, I would recommend reading through in detail, right, and asking us. If you want, you can ask me any questions. No guarantees that I'll get back to you immediately, obviously, because I have to prioritize my students first. But yeah, the second point is talking about the supply chain, and to prove this, I use Apple and Samsung, right? They release a new product every year, and what that does is it entices people to consume more. So over here we are talking about a practice, and this is quite similar to very, very cheap marketing ploy called planned obsolescence. Although if you take these two companies to court with all these allegations, they will defeat you very easily, because they'll say no, it's not planned obsolescence, we are just releasing a new product line. But the idea is it taps on that FOMO again, you see, and it compels people to purchase the latest iPhone model or the latest Samsung model, Galaxy Note 10,000 or iPhone Omega Platinum 99 or something like that. I don't know, right? I don't know, because my phone is over 6 years old at this juncture. Yeah. And what we can do, and again, this is the third application of how you can use examples to tie in with one another, is you can parallel it with another paragraph. So in this particular case, I talk about Apple and Samsung and all their products, right? This parallels the fast fashion industry because it can compound environmental problems, right? Specifically the mining of precious metals and other materials, blah 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 blah. So here's the thing, for students that are taking the new GP syllabus, right? So what that means is that the students that as of 2024, you are a JC2 student, right? And for the JC1 students that have just enrolled this year, there is a change in the syllabus in that there is a greater preference of this concept now called the connection of ideas, right? It's in the syllabus. If you want, you can go and read it in the official syllabus on SEAB's website. But the idea is that there is a greater emphasis on students now trying to connect the analysis that they have in each body paragraph with the others, Alright? The idea being that they don't want you guys to just analyze things in silos. That means you have 4 body paragraphs that do not connect to one another or that well. So in doing this, you are highlighting to the examiner that, you know, you understand the interweaving sort of things that are occurring here, right? That it's not just a question of supply side on its own creating problems. You are also trying to point out that these two are inextricably linked to one another. Okay? So for instance, right? There we go. If you read the link here, okay, there is a vicious cycle of overproduction to feed overconsumption, which in turn encourages further overproduction. So what we are doing here is we are trying to highlight the links between consumption habits and the supply chain as a whole. All right. And of course, other examples. The other example that I use in this paragraph is big oil lah. Can't go wrong with them. In terms of using them as negative examples of, you know, the impacts of business activities on the environment, you can't go wrong with using big oil or gas companies. Yeah. So finally, the last thing that I want to address here, albeit briefly, because again we are going to create dedicated videos for this, evaluation, right? I have seen many students ask me before, doesn't this sound as if you are undermining your own point? Yes and no. All right. So the thing is that when we do an evaluation, typically we are trying to highlight the limitations of our argument, and it may seem contradictory, but there are a couple of things, or rather there are a couple of reasons why we will do something like that. Number one, obviously, whatever point that you are discussing here is not going to be the basis of your thesis statement. That's one reason, right? The second reason is that you are just simply highlighting the nuances here. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely, there's nothing wrong with that, because by highlighting more nuance, you're highlighting to the examiners that you know what you're talking about and you know the intricacies of whatever issues that you are discussing. So in this particular case, how I evaluated was I pointed out that, you know, whether like in the current supply chain, right, or in the current climate, pun unintended, of consumption, right, certainly it's fundamentally unsustainable, but certain exotic goods and services, you know, over time have been so-called phased out in a sense. So things like ivory, right, there's an increasing ethical awareness of such consumption, and there's an increasing knowledge, you know, of the correlation between, you know, overhunting and species extinction, right? And all this knowledge only came by in the past couple of hundred years only, you know, because obviously, you know, a couple of hundreds of years ago there's this whole idea of a great chain of being or whatever. If you're interested, go and look up that particular theory. Obviously today is outdated already, but yeah. So what I'm trying to address here is that more and more people are turning away from certain products like shark's fin, ivory, yeah, but at the same time, you know, certain problems of poaching and overconsumption still continue to exist. So yeah, okay. So at this juncture, right, just want to point out the next few points. Okay, nascent business models and individual practices that reassess our management of environmental resources. The examples that I use would be things like tiny house movement, or locally the iJuice company, right? So the expanded orange peels and all that, they are used and recycled, to be used as like cleaning agents or whatever, right? Basically this is the idea of the circular economy, right? So if I produce a particular good, maybe the waste from that can be recycled or reused and repurposed or retooled to create other goods and services, things like that. All right. Yeah, but the evaluation here is that they are still in their nascent stage, and it requires a lot of resources to carry out all these businesses viably. So because of that, right, the production costs of creating all these products, they are often offloaded to the consumers, so they are not the cheapest goods around, because all these companies, they are still not that large, they still haven't scaled, so they can't enjoy economies of scale. Okay, and finally, in the last point, on top of all these new ways to manage our relationship with the environment, law and policymakers are increasingly implementing fundamental reforms. So from here, very straightforward, we are talking about legislation, things like the European Climate Law, alright? Or, again, local example, towards Zero Waste SG Master Plan. A bit ambitious, but yeah. Okay. That being said, right, again, the evaluation here is that one still must remain cognizant of the stakeholders for which such changes represent an existential threat. The idea being that, yes, we can shift away from fossil fuels, but certain companies, especially your big oil companies, they are going to resist this as hard as they can, because you are threatening their livelihoods, you see. So yeah, that's the evaluation here, but at the end of the day, our conclusion is that, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is, our current lifestyle is indeed unsustainable, but things are changing. At the same time, certain things can be done. So in your conclusions, what you can do is you can offer a solution, or you can offer more nuance. You can evaluate your ideas even more. But what I would say is that writing a good conclusion is not gonna be priority number one. Your first and foremost priority should be, number one, ideating nuanced arguments, right, to your question. Number two, well-written body paragraphs. Nail these two down first, then you think about dealing with your introductions and conclusions. So for your conclusions, if you are still not sure, just defer to a summary of arguments first. Build on all the other things, then deal with improving on your conclusion. Okay? So yeah, but in this particular case, what I said was such changes must happen, and they must continue to happen, because they are absolutely necessary to reverse the prevailing damages to the environment and to ensure a future for our descendants. That's the basic idea here. Okay, so yeah, that's a breakdown of this essay. If you have any questions, feel free to drop us a text. All right, and again, our details can be found here. The discourse-education.com.sg/discourse-education-podcast. If you have a question about this essay, do drop us a question there. If you are looking for a free trial for GP tuition, feel free to contact us for a free trial lesson, 0 strings attached. Our contact details can be found on our website. So I hope this has been of some help for you, right? I rarely do this, because obviously don't want to give away too much, right? But yeah. So anyway, hope you guys learned something from that, and I'll see you guys next time.